Stu and I were going to be driving at the 24-hour at Mossport, and Stu flew into Detroit, landed in Detroit, and I picked him up at the airport, and we drove to Mossport together, and we talked about this record and the potential for breaking the record. We talked about it a lot, and I'd done a little bit of research based on him calling me and talking about it. Jim Miniker had done some research on it, so he had some information that on what the record was and what it might take to break it.
Hey, there's a record out there that looks like it's good for the plucking. It was a record that was nearly 40 years old, set by Mormon Meteor on Bonneville Salt Flats, and the record was 161 miles an hour for 24 hours. Well, we had just produced a production car, the ZR1 with an LT5 engine that had a top speed of 180 miles an hour in street trim. Looked like a no-brainer, you know. Let's go set a 24-hour record with a production car.
And we talked about doing that. We got to Mossport for the 24-hour, and we spent time with Tommy Morrison talking about it. And Tommy was just all over it. He says, "We got to do this. We got to do this." And so Tommy went right off and started talking to potential sponsors, and Mobil Oil and Delco at the time, and a number of other sponsors. I think Lotus, because of the ZR1 motors, the LT5 motors. So Tommy started putting that together, and I started working on the engineering end on, well, what will this really take to do this? What do we know about the car? And we'd learned so much about the car from all the 24-hour races that we ran in the 1980s that we felt we really knew where all the weak spots were. We knew what it took to make sure that there weren't any weaknesses in the car that would keep it from doing the record. The car had enough performance. The aerodynamics was good enough. The power was good enough. The handling was good enough. Everything looked like this ought to work.
John had insisted, based on his background, that we try to stay as production as we could, because we've done all this endurance testing. We've done a lot of engine dynamometer endurance work to make sure that things work right. Once you start changing from that formula, you're inviting trouble.
Kind of the behind the scenes, I know Herb Fischel was head of motorsports at the time, and he was absolutely against doing it. To him, this is just crazy. The chance of success of this is not very good. And I always thought really highly of Herb, but I thought, Herb, you know a lot about the race cars and you're excellent at that. I know it can be successful. And obviously Ralph Kramer was the director of PR and communications for Chevrolet at the time, and I think internally, people like Ralph and Herb, they were all of the opinion there's very little chance that this is really going to work.
We said that couldn't be done, and in fact, we did it secretly. He did it secretly, so that in case they failed, which they were almost certainly going to do, we would not have to embarrass ourselves by reporting that we'd lost a car out there in the middle of the West Texas desert.
And it was all pretty much being done outside of GM. We were taking vacation to work on the cars and run this effort. And but we had it very well covered. We had a program that was, had a real good chance of success. Obviously, anything can happen. You can blow a tire and wreck the car or whatever, so there's definitely some real high risks to it, but we thought we had the risks covered as well as you possibly could for as risky a venture as it was.
Fort Stockton was quite a town. That track was 7.7 miles long, and you had 1.5 mile turn at each end of it. We had quite a time. I had 14 boys from Mexico shooting shotguns. We had a real problem with the deer and the wolves, and because we were right there in the middle of the desert. I never will forget it. I had those guys shooting shotguns the whole time we were doing this thing. I was so busy putting together the total deal that I actually didn't get a chance to do any testing. So I just got in the car, and I knew the thing was going to run fast enough to do this. We started early in the morning and run all night long at Heinrich C. He started the red car and I started the white car. I'd get about 6 inches away from his bumper. And then folks with FIA would get real excited, they get mad, and so that we're going to disqualify us both.
And I was lucky enough to be part of the team, and I know basically the reason for that. It's very handy to have somebody that's got some driver skill that can also think about what the car is doing. When you're sitting in the driver's seat there and you're able to analyze what's going on with the car, is it right or is it deteriorating? And if it's deteriorating, what part of it's deteriorating, so you can communicate back to the crew chief. It was a great time, quite nerve-wracking, of course. As you're, the more time you spend at those kinds of speeds, and we were, in order to set a record of that magnitude, of course, your on-track speed has to be quite a bit higher than that, because every time you come down for a driver's change, for fuel, for tires, and so on, you are essentially adding time at zero. And so then you got to make that time back up. So most of the time on the track is circulating at 180 miles an hour, and that's a football field every second, all through the day and night. If there's rain or animals or what have you, things can get pretty exciting pretty quickly. So as you're circulating, and the shifts were roughly an hour, you got a lot of time to think about what could go wrong, and what's going to happen if it does, where am I going to go, what's my recovery plan, and that sort of thing. So.
The car is really living up to expectations. We're having to run it pretty hard. We don't get an opportunity to do that very often, and it's really out there performing well. It's living up to our expectations. It's hard not to sometimes stand back a little bit in awe that we're producing this for the public.
The car is incredibly stable at 180 miles an hour. With the selective ride system that we have, it's essentially like riding down the freeway.
The car was just beautiful. It's amazing that a car that can come right off a showroom floor, that can go out and run 180 miles an hour plus and be so comfortable to drive. It just, other than the ball of my foot tingling from pushing so hard on the throttle, trying to go faster, that was the only thing. I'm just absolutely thrilled to be part of this deal. We're going to go down in history today. That's all I can say.
In the end, we were successful and broke the world record. Matter of fact, we broke 3 of them with the LT5 ZR1 car. The 24-hour, it was a 5,000 kilometer record, which was about 18 hours, I think. 24-hour record, obviously 24 hours, and then we did the 5,000 mile, which took almost 30 hours to do.
When all was said and done, we eclipsed all of that, and I think everybody had about enough. Think about this, you've been up probably at that point with some naps, maybe 36 hours, 40 hours or whatever, because you got there early, you've gone to 30 hours, and I recall calling back to Dave and said, hey, we got it. And he said, well, if you got tires and fuel left, why don't you keep going? Everybody said, I think we've had enough, worried about the car here a little bit. So it's a great experience, and it sure showed that the Corvette in basically street trim was up to the task.
I think all these people were pretty surprised when we really pulled it off. But it was quite the operation. It's not a highlight of your career; it's a highlight of your life to be able to go out and do something like that's successful.
Running this event for us is making a statement about the durability and reliability of the Corvette, as well as its performance potential. We feel like we have something to tell the world about what this car is really all about and how it stacks up against other cars in the world for endurance, for performance, and that kind of thing. And we feel that by doing this, we're making a heck of a statement and showing how proud we are of what General Motors and CPC has accomplished in producing a car like the ZR1 and the L98 Corvettes. We feel that we can stack these cars up against anything in the world, and in fact beat anything in the world. And so we feel very proud of that.
One thing about it, it couldn't have been done if it hadn't been a Chevrolet. That's for sure.
You look back on it, you say, gee, we missed, had we done a more thorough job of preparing to cover that incident, that whole episode, how much even greater would have been the impact. But the way it was, it turned out, no question, it was a marvelous thing. And I mean, you think about a production, basically a production ZR1, 24 hours at 175 miles per hour. What is that, 10 Indianapolis 500s back to back? You think about the odds of being able to pull that off. I mean, were just incredible. So great that I was certain that it was not going to happen, that there'd be some problem. And gee, I'd get a phone call from, I had a guy named Tom Hoxie, was on my staff. He was down there, and so he'd call me every hour or so. They're still running.
I lost about $300,000 on a particular deal.
This is after all the money that you got rid of. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you remember, y'all paid for lunch.
Yes.
A real good food catering.
Yes.
Good food situation.
And of course, Fort Stockton, they have fine caterers down there.
Oh yeah, they have. I understand I had a good time in the bar down there, but in the pool room. And I think it was one of the nights that I actually did some singing. All I can tell you is that it was a real good day.